imperfection, the more we have this greater outlook on life. Just think imperfection. We were talking about fatherhood a few minutes ago and your competitive nature, my competitive nature, and how we, when watching our kids, we get all fired up, and that's how anybody is, right? There's an energy. But the interesting dynamic of that is parenting is the ultimate example of imperfections. You will never be perfect, and you want your children to be better than you at lots of things. And I remind my boys all the time, like, hey, all the things you dislike, all the things you think I should do better, keep track of them and then do them, because I'm completely behind this. But just realize I'm doing the best I can at the moment I'm in, and I will fail incessantly. But this is a part of life. And the more comfortable I become with imperfection, the more comfortable become with exactly who I am and what I'm great at, as long as I'm working towards a greater good.
I think that's wonderful, and it's inspiring for me. I'm not your kid, but sometimes it made me feel like, oh man, I wish he was my dad.
Well, that makes me feel good too. But I will tell you, part of that, my son said something to me a couple weeks ago, and he said something that was a little judgy, and I just said, "Hey, listen, when you play a game, he's a Division I college athlete, and I said, when you play a game, every game, are you perfect? Are you give it your best every single game?" And he said, "No." I said, "Right, but you want to, right? Intent is what you have. The intent is to do your best. Yet even doing your best sometimes isn't enough." And he said, "That's right." I said, "So would you say that 80 to 90% of the time you give your best and it's worth it?" And he goes, "100%. That's exactly right." And I said, "Well, as a dad, 80 to 90%, I'm going to be a really great dad. There are times where 10% of the time I revert back to things that I grew up with, opinions that may not be popular, versions of myself that I'm trying to fix, whatever it may be. Just remember, if you could be just a little bit better than that, then you're going to be a really great dad too one day." And so I definitely had that conversation, but it was coming from a place where it was like, aren't you being hypocritical? Aren't you doing this? I'm like, no, I believe this. I say this. I do this most of the time. And every once in a while I fail.
It's a great modeling, and I think we could all take something away from that from in the realm of work as well. I think there's a lot of temptation when you make a mistake to defend it, because you feel a lot of pressure to have all the answers. But actually, what we found in our research is that the best leaders are actually more likely to admit when they've made a mistake. And they're more likely to say when they don't know. That's actually another critical point, is when they don't know something, they don't try to make it up, or, what they do is they say, I don't know, but I bet we can find out. And that tells people it's okay not to have all the answers. And the more important thing is to have a desire to learn. And so when it comes to creating a team that is interested in improving over time, that keeps getting better, that's the key, is modeling that learning mindset. And it comes in the things you say and the things you do. It's imperative for the leader to make it feel safe for people to take risks, because this is a thing that a lot of organizations miss. Is at most businesses, it's surprisingly hard to get better over time. And I know we're on a high performance podcast, so this is key. If you want people to improve, you need to make it safe for them to make mistakes, because anytime people do something new, they're going to fail. And unless they feel comfortable with the occasional failure, they cannot get better. And so what we find in our research is that the best leaders make it more comfortable for people to take those risks. They do a few specific things. One is they talk about mistakes they've made over the course of their career. And that sends a signal that mistakes aren't something to hide. There's something to learn from. The other thing they do is when something goes wrong, they don't look to blame. They look for the lessons for everyone of how do we get better. And they make it clear for people that unless they're making mistakes, they're not growing. And I'll give you some examples of this from the research I think are really interesting. One is Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn. Back when he was leading LinkedIn, he would tell his team he doesn't expect perfection. He actually wants them to fail 15% of the time. And what his view was, unless they're failing a little bit, it doesn't mean they're getting everything right. It means they're moving too slowly. The other example is Reed Hastings, the other Reed at Netflix. And back when he was at Netflix, when they had just started out, if all their shows were successes, he'd be a little disappointed. And it was because from his view, if you're getting everything right, it means you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking enough risks. You're not aiming high enough. And so what both of those examples illustrate is that the best leaders don't just make it safe to make mistakes. They actually are disappointed unless mistakes happen.
Yeah, listen, I have made my fair share of mistakes and I plan to continue to make them and stretch. At the end of the day, it's something that makes us all human. And I think striving for excellence over perfection is much better. I think when we strive for perfection, we're always disappointed because we will never get there. I mean, the life model, Ron, is one where it's built around imbalance. My entire life model says that you will never be perfect, you will never be balanced. The reason I break the world up in love, impact, faith, and energy is because at one point in time in my life, no matter where I'm at, I am giving more energy to one or two of those areas than the other one or two. And that means that I'm imbalanced. It's the alignment, it's the awareness, it's the things that pull us back in to allow me to know, okay, I'm not going to fail too far. I'm going to make sure I've been at work a lot lately. Or I've been traveling a lot lately. Let me go and have a date night with my wife. Let me go make sure the kids and I are playing some golf or getting a couple of soccer balls and kicking some balls around the backyard, like whatever it may be. These are the things that I think really help us not only as leaders, but as fathers and mothers and anybody in general. Like we have to realign, but it means we're pressing. And if you're pressing, that's really what high performing is all about, right?
I love your point about how you actually are striving for imperfection because perfection is impossible. And if you strive for it, you're going to be disappointed. That's such an important point, and it's one that's so easy to overlook when you have high standards for yourself. And it's a trap we all fall into, and it's wasted
Yeah,
energy.
it's really interesting when you talk about the value of teams. I've always found great value in having different unique abilities surrounding me. So early on, you think in your career and life, you kind of think that having a lot of people that are like you would be advantageous. The older I get, the more I love having people that think differently, work differently, bring different dynamics. What in the research did you find about the different dynamics of teammates and their own unique ability?
First, let me just say I appreciate your point on basically what you're talking about. The researchers would call this complementarity. So, finding people who have skills that you lack and being surrounded by those people, that enables you to achieve more than you ever could on your own. And that's often what the best teammates bring is they bring different skills that you don't have. Now, one of the things I talk about in the book is this guy Sam Presti. He's the general manager of the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I describe reading articles about his office and what he does in his office. He pulls out quotes from books that he's read that he wants to be reminded of on a day to day basis. And I kind of stole that idea from my own office. And I've got a quote here. I'm going to pull it up because I think this is incredibly relevant to your point
Awesome.
just now. I'm bringing this up for the YouTube audience. Hopefully Netflix one day, right, Scott?
That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to read the quote that I have on the wall. Now, I picked this up from the books. It's not my quote, but I think it's incredibly relevant. The key to scaling: find a person who is better than you at one aspect of your job. You don't need a single person who solves everything, just one aspect of your job, one at a time. And that's exactly your point, which is you want to find people who are better than you. But the key is not to look for the one special person who's going to be your savior. You're looking for someone who's going to add one skill at a time.
Well, all you did was just reiterate the other point, which is as a leader or the as a leader of a company in general, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to add the person that could do a multitude of things. Instead of finding that one or two things that's going to move you forward, move the needle. There's a lot that's that failure component, right? I don't want to fail in this person. I know they could do multiple things. So if they can't do this right, they can do this right versus hiring the humans that are great humans that bring something to the table that's going to be extremely valuable. And I love that. I love that quote too. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. Now, you asked about the dynamics between teammates. So, one of the things we did in the research in super teams is we asked 1,000 people to think about the worst teammate they've ever had. And then another 1,000 people think about the best teammate they've ever had. And we asked them to describe these people. And statistically, we were able to pull out what are the characteristics of the best teammates and what are the characteristics of the worst teammates. So, Scott, I'm gonna name these now, and
Okay.
I want you to let's see if you can guess what is the number one characteristic of a toxic teammate.
Individualism. I. Ego.
Selfishness, right?
Selfishness. That's right.
Okay, it's not selfishness, but it was a good guess because it was on our top five. The number one trait is unreliable. This is the teammate who fails to follow through. They say they're going to do one thing, they always fail. When you have an unreliable person, it's often more frustrating than if you have an incompetent person, because at least an incompetent person, you can be like, okay, I'm just going to pretend that person's dead and move on and do their job for them. But if they're unreliable, it's unpredictable, and the unpredictability is what leads to the stress. The number one characteristic of a great teammate is knowledgeable. This is the teammate whose expertise moves the team forward. Now, what I find really interesting is when we look at the traits that are really positive, but didn't make our top three, there were things like good listener, funny, caring. They weren't at the top. So the question is, why aren't these characteristics? We all want a funny teammate. We all want a good listener. Why isn't that the representative, the best teammate? And it's because those are all features of people who are nice to hang around with. But that's not the same thing as being a great teammate. So a lot of people think when you're on a team, okay, I'm just going to put my head down, do the work, and I'm going to be a good teammate because I'm doing my job. But being a good teammate and being a good employee are completely different skills. And so the best teammates don't just do a good job, they do a good job and they make the people around them better. And knowledgeability is one of the examples of, if I know my stuff, I can predict obstacles and I'm going to warn you in advance, I'm making you better.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, being a teammate, it's really funny. I love hiring athletes, and the reason I love hiring athletes is because they have spent their entire life on teams. Now, not all of them have been successful, but I love hiring athletes, especially of sports where they required significant team approach. I'm a big soccer fan. In soccer, if my job as a striker is to make runs off the ball, to create space, and to score, that's my job. But I can't do that if the midfield isn't bringing the ball up and distributing. And they can't do that if the defense is not holding their own and distributing out and building from the back, right? And so all these people work together. And in a team, when we're hiring great people, I love to bring in people that have already been on teams, because they have this mentality that they're going to be reliable, they're going to show up, and they want to do what's good for the team, not just themselves.
Well, you know what you just described as role clarity, right? That was one of the key features we talked about to creating strangers into a team. Everyone needs to know what their role is. And a lot of times, either people don't understand why their responsibility matters in terms of making other better, or they try to do too much. And doing too much is just as bad as not doing doing too little. The other thing, I love your point about hiring athletes and the mentality of athletes. I talk a lot about that in the book, because one of the things we find with athletes is they raise accountability among their teammates. They are accountable for their behaviors, but if someone isn't doing their job, they're going to hold them accountable. So within our research, we asked people a simple question. We said, when things go wrong on your team, who do you feel worse about letting down? Do you feel worse about letting down your boss, or do you feel worse about letting down your teammates? On super teams, it wasn't even close. 82% said, I feel worse about letting down my teammates. And there's this great quote from PJ Fleck. He's the head coach of the Minnesota Golden Gophers football team, the college football team. And what he says is, on bad teams, no one leads. On average teams, the coaches lead, but on elite teams, the players lead. And that's exactly what we find in super teams, is you want a team where people feel accountable to one another. I'll just say one other thing about this. There's also research showing that in profit sharing organizations, in organizations where everyone shares the profit, you tend to see far better performance. And it's not because people work harder because they know they're going to make more money if the organization does well. It's that accountability piece. If a colleague isn't holding their own, I'm going to have no trouble going to that person and be like, hey, you need to get a hold of this because we're all counting on you. But if we don't have that profit sharing aspect, then I'm going to keep my head down because I don't want to rock the boat.
So YouTube has this cool feature where they pick the next video for you, and it's right here on this screen. So I hope you enjoy this next video.